I was 12 when my parents left me alone for the first time. They had to go out of state for something urgent and couldn't take me with them. I acted like it didn't bother me, like I was fine with it, but I wasn't. I didn't like how quiet the house felt at night, especially after midnight. It wasn't just silence. It was the kind that pressed down on you, like the walls were holding their breath. I just had to make it through one more night. I kept everything locked, triple-checked every door. I didn't open any windows. I didn't even turn on the hallway lights because I hated how the darkness pulled at the bottom of the stairs. I tried to watch some cartoons to distract myself, but even those felt weird without anyone else around. I fell asleep on the couch, remote in hand, a blanket pulled up to my neck. The TV hummed low in the background. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. The screen had gone to static. That wasn't what bothered me. It was the silence behind it, the kind that told me something wasn't where it should be. My neck felt stiff. My mouth was dry. I sat up slowly and tried to listen past the static. That's when I heard the first noise. It came from the back of the house, a dull, deliberate thud. I waited for another sound, hoping it had just been something falling over, but there was nothing. No wind, no creak, just the kind of silence that doesn't sit right. I stood up with my heart pounding. I picked up the bat my dad left me just in case and started walking toward the hallway. The living room suddenly felt like a trap, like I was standing out in the open. I moved down the hallway, keeping my steps light. The walls felt too narrow, the air too cold. I didn't turn on any lights because I didn't want to be seen. I reached the back door and stopped. The lock was undone. I stared at it, not believing what I saw. I had locked it. I remember doing it. There was no question. My fingers hovered over the bolt, too afraid to touch it, like if I moved, whatever was inside might hear me. I backed away slowly. My brain started trying to make sense of it. Maybe the door hadn't latched right. Maybe it was just the wind. But that didn't explain the noise. I didn't want to open the door to check. I didn't want to see what might be on the other side. I turned around and ran to the hallway closet. I climbed in, pulled the door shut, and tucked myself behind the coats. It wasn't safe, but it was dark, and I could see just enough through the crack in the door. I held the bat against my leg and tried to calm my breathing. A minute passed. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from the kitchen. Not rushed, just confident, like whoever it was didn't think they needed to be quiet. Then another voice, deeper and angrier, spoke, low but clear. He told the other man to hurry up, that they didn't have all night, that the place was supposed to be empty. I didn't move a muscle. One of them laughed, said it looked like an easy job. He opened a cabinet loudly, like he was testing if anyone would react. The other one walked around the living room. His boots made a hard sound on the tile. He sounded too close. I clenched my teeth and stayed as still as I could. Every step they made was sharp, deliberate. They weren't guessing. They knew what they were doing. They started searching room by room. One opened drawers while the other flipped furniture. Things hit the floor. A lamp broke. One of them cursed loud and kicked something, then told the other to check upstairs. I could hear every footstep echo off the walls. The quiet wasn't there anymore. Now it was chaos. I stayed in the closet, praying that they wouldn't open it. I felt the vibration of their steps through the floor, the way a rabbit might feel a fox approaching the burrow. Then it changed. A voice shouted from upstairs. "There's food on the table. It's fresh. No one's supposed to be here." The one downstairs stopped moving. I heard him breathing hard. He started walking again, faster this time, checking doors, knocking things over. The front door opened for a second, then slammed shut. They were locking us in. I wasn't supposed to be here, and now I was trapped. I heard a drawer in the kitchen slam, a chair get thrown, glass shatter somewhere behind me. The tall one was near the hallway again. He passed by the closet, stopped for a second, then kept walking. I didn't know why he didn't check it. Maybe he thought it was too obvious. Maybe he was saving it for last. Upstairs, the short one was tearing through every room, opening every cabinet, every closet. His voice came again. "Find the kid. If he saw us, we're done." They weren't worried about stealing anymore. They weren't calm. They were hunting. I couldn't sit there any longer. I waited until they were both upstairs, then I slipped out, moving low and fast through the hallway. I knew where the side door was. I just needed to make it to the garage. The tiles were cold under my feet. Every step felt too loud. I made it to the door, turned the lock slowly, and pushed it open. It creaked. The sound was soft, but it cut through the noise like a scream. One of them shouted from the second floor, "Hey!" I ran through the garage, dodging boxes, grabbing at the door handle to the outside. I got it open and hit the yard, sprinting barefoot toward the fence. I was almost there when I felt the weight crash into me. I fell hard, the air knocked out of my lungs. The tall one had grabbed my legs and was pulling me back. I kicked, twisted, and slammed the bat backward, catching him in the knee. He howled and let go. I rolled, got up, and ran back toward the house. The door slammed behind me. I locked it and backed away, breathing fast. I didn't know where the short one was. I took the stairs, 2 at a time, heading for the attic. There was an old fold-down ladder in the hallway. I yanked it down, climbed up, and pulled it back up behind me. I crawled into the dark, moving behind an old box and a mattress, and curled up as small as I could. Downstairs, I heard them yelling. The tall one was limping. The other asked if he got me. The tall one shouted back as if the kid had a bat and almost broke his leg. The short one didn't care. He said if I got away, they'd be back in prison before sunrise. The attic was pitch black and stank of insulation and dust. I stayed low, listening. Everything was quiet for a few seconds. Then the ladder creaked. They were climbing up. I grabbed the screwdriver from the toolbox beside me and crouched behind a support beam. The tall one came up first, holding a flashlight. His face was sweaty and furious. He wasn't looking around carefully. He was moving fast, angry, careless. As he passed the beam, I lunged. I drove the screwdriver into his shoulder. He screamed, dropped the flashlight, and stumbled back. I tried to run past him, but he grabbed my shirt and yanked me backward. I slammed into the floor hard. My elbow burned. I kicked at his face, got him once, and he let it go. I jumped down the attic ladder and landed awkwardly but didn't stop. I ran down the hallway, headed for the bathroom, but the short one came out of a bedroom and grabbed me by the arm. I twisted free and made it halfway down the stairs before they caught me again. I swung the bat wildly and clipped one of them in the ribs. He fell down 2 steps, coughing. I bolted for the front door, unlocked it, pulled it open, and the tall one slammed it shut before I could get out. He picked me up like I weighed nothing. I kicked and screamed. I bit his arm deep, enough to taste blood. He dropped me, but it was too late. The short one tackled me and pinned me down. "Enough! I've had it! Bag him and go!" The taller one pulled out a black cloth bag and shoved it over my head. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe right. My hands were tied with something rough. They carried me outside. I could feel the night air for a second, then metal walls. I was thrown into the back of their truck like trash. The door slammed. Everything went dark and hot and loud. The truck roared to life and took off fast. I was tossed against the wall, still tied, still blind. I heard them yelling up front. The short one was saying it wasn't worth it, that they barely got anything. The tall one shouted that the kid was worth more than any of the crap in the house, that no one would press charges if they returned me safe, maybe even got a reward. But neither of them sounded sure. They sounded like animals trapped in a cage, snapping at each other. The truck turned sharply. I hit the floor again. My shoulder screamed in pain. The road was rough. I felt every bump. Then the short one started yelling louder, told the other to speed up, said they might have already called the cops. The engine howled. The tires screeched. And then everything stopped. There was a crash, a brutal metal-on-metal kind of crash. I heard glass explode, heard someone scream. Then nothing. I stayed still, not knowing if I was dead or alive. The bag was still over my head. I couldn't move my arms. I just laid there in the dark, trying to breathe until I heard voices. More than two. Calm, sharp voices. Radios clicking. Someone opened the back of the truck. The bag came off. It was a cop. He didn't say anything heroic, just looked at me and started cutting the ropes on my wrists. I blinked hard at the flashing red and blue lights behind them. He asked me if I could walk. I nodded, barely. Later, I found out both men had been arrested trying to flee through the woods. One had a screwdriver still stuck in his shoulder. The other was limping from falling down the stairs. Neither made it far. My parents cried when they saw me. I didn't cry back. I was shocked. I stayed home because work did not stop for holidays, and someone had to cover the late shift that week. My wife took the kids to visit her family, and I helped load the car without complaining because staying alone sounded easier than traveling with noise and obligations. When they left, the house felt empty, but manageable, like a place waiting to be used properly. I ordered food I usually do not eat, turned on the TV, and planned to stay awake late without worrying about anyone else. I walked through the house once, locking doors and windows, not because I was afraid, but because it was routine. The cameras were on, the alarm was set, and everything looked normal on the screens. I sat on the couch and tried to relax, but silence is never fully quiet when you are alone. Every sound stands out more, even the harmless ones. I told myself it was fine and focused on the screen, forcing my attention to stay there. The night was supposed to pass without any interruption, without any reason to remember it later. I had no idea how fast that plan would fall apart. The doorbell rang once, sharp and loud, and I froze on the couch instead of standing up. I muted the TV and listened, hoping it would stop and prove it was nothing. It rang again, longer this time, followed by a fist hitting the door hard enough to shake it. I opened the camera feed instead of the door. A young woman stood outside, crying so hard her face was twisted and red. She kept turning her head, scanning the street behind her, shaking like she could barely stay upright. She screamed for help and begged whoever was inside to open the door. I hesitated because everything about the situation felt wrong. But then I thought about my daughter. I imagined her alone, terrified, begging a stranger for help while someone watched her from the dark. That thought pushed past my doubt and made the decision for me. I unlocked the door and opened it. She rushed inside, nearly knocking me over, and screamed for me to close it. I slammed the door shut and locked it while my heart started racing faster than it should have. Before she spoke clearly, the tension in the room climbed fast and heavy, pressing into my chest until breathing felt harder than it should. She paced back and forth, rubbing her arms and neck like something was crawling on her skin, and she could not stay still for more than a second. She told me they were after her and that they were close, and her voice cracked every time she tried to explain. When I asked who they were, she changed the subject, jumped to another thought, and then circled back without finishing anything. Her eyes never stopped moving. I told her I could call the police, trying to keep my voice calm, but she reacted instantly and violently. She yelled that calling them would get her killed and that phones were how they tracked people. She grabbed my wrist and squeezed hard enough to hurt, begging me not to do it. At that point, fear hit me fully because her grip was strong and desperate, and her face was twisted with panic that felt contagious. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking, and I could feel sweat running down my back while I tried to pull away. Before anything broke, she stopped suddenly and stared at her arm like it was not hers. Her breathing changed, becoming short and fast, and she whispered that something was moving under her skin. She dug her nails in and screamed when blood appeared, shouting for me to get it out. Before the house turned into chaos, there was a moment when I realized I had lost control completely. She was no longer asking for help or explaining anything, and her movements became sharp and unpredictable, like she could snap in any direction. She ran into the kitchen and started ripping drawers open, throwing knives and utensils onto the floor without caring where they landed. I followed her at a distance, terrified of getting too close, trying to talk her down while my voice shook badly. She grabbed a glass, smashed it against the counter, and pressed the broken edge into her arm again while screaming that insects were digging deeper. Blood ran down her skin and onto the floor, and the sound of it hitting tile made my stomach turn. I stepped forward and tried to grab her arms, but she reacted instantly and slammed her elbow into my ribs. The pain was sharp and breath-stealing, and I fell back into a chair that collapsed under my weight. She started destroying anything she could reach, hitting walls, knocking over furniture, screaming that the house was infected and needed to be broken open. I could barely stand. My chest hurt, and panic made my thoughts slow and messy. Before I ran, I stood there too long, watching my house fall apart and realizing I was trapped inside it with her. My fear was no longer distant or controlled, and every movement she made felt like a direct threat. She turned toward me with glass still in her hand and walked closer, telling me I was part of it now. She said opening the door marked me and that they would not stop until I was torn apart too. Her voice was loud, shaking, and filled with something close to rage. I backed away toward the hallway while begging her to stop, but she lunged at me and swung the glass toward my face. I raised my arm and felt it slice open, warm blood running instantly down to my hand. I ran to the bathroom and locked the door just as she slammed into it. The impact shook the walls and the door bent inward with each hit. I pressed my body against it, crying and gasping for air while she screamed on the other side. I called the police while whispering and shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. She kept hitting the door and yelling that she could hear things moving inside me now, and every word made my fear worse. Before the noise stopped, I thought the door would give in and that she would get to me. My arms were burning from pushing, and my legs felt weak and close to failing. The banging suddenly stopped, leaving a silence that felt dangerous and wrong. I stayed frozen, waiting for the next hit, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Then I heard glass shatter somewhere in the house. Cold air rushed in through the broken window, followed by fast footsteps moving away. I stayed locked inside until police voices filled the house and someone knocked, calling my name. They found the kitchen window smashed and blood smeared across the floor. But she was gone. A neighbor saw her run into the street and disappear between houses, barefoot and screaming. They wrapped my arm and asked questions, but there were no answers that helped. No name, no explanation, and no sign of where she went. The house never felt the same after that night, even after repairs were done and the glass was replaced. Silence no longer felt calm, but it always reminded me of waiting behind that bathroom door. I told my wife only part of what happened, because I could not say the rest out loud without shaking. She wanted me to come stay with them, but I stayed home because leaving felt worse. The police never called back with news, and no reports ever matched her description. It was like she vanished after breaking into my life for one night.
At that time, I'd been dating a man named Cameron for a little over 2 months. We met through social media and things moved quickly between us. After a few weeks, I started staying overnight at his house. Cameron lived alone in a small house on a quiet street, and after a while, the place felt familiar to me. Once he had to work on the weekend and left me sleeping. When I woke up, the room was bright with daylight and the house was completely quiet. I stayed in bed for a while scrolling through my phone. Then, the scratching sound started under the bed, and it kept coming back in a slow and uneven rhythm that didn't belong to pipes, wood, or anything normal inside a house. At first, I stayed still and listened carefully because the sound was strange enough that I wanted to understand it before moving. It sounded like claws scraping against wood or cardboard. After a few weeks, the sound returned, and each time it happened, the scraping lasted longer. I slowly pushed the blanket aside and sat up in the bed while keeping my eyes on the floor. The sound came again while I was sitting there, and this time it felt closer than before, almost like something was touching the underside of the mattress. Before doing anything else, I took a moment to look around the room and make sure nothing obvious had fallen or shifted during the night. The room looked exactly the same as always, with the dresser against the wall, the window half open, and the same pile of clothes on the chair beside the bed. Nothing looked strange, but the scratching returned again from the floor. I leaned down and looked under the bed, expecting to see a stray cat or maybe a rat that had somehow entered the house during the night. Instead of an animal, I noticed a long wooden box pushed deep under the frame. The box looked old and heavy, and the sound was coming from inside it. When I reached down and grabbed the edge of the box, I realized immediately that something about it was wrong, because the thing barely moved, even when I pulled hard with both hands. I stayed kneeling on the floor while holding the edge of the box, and for a moment I considered leaving it alone and walking out of the house, because something about the situation felt deeply wrong. While I was still thinking about what to do next, the box suddenly moved from inside and hit the wooden floor with a dull thump that made me jump backward. The sound that followed was not scratching anymore, because it sounded like something hitting the inside of the box with weak fists that were running out of strength. Before touching the box again, I forced myself to sit there and listen carefully, because the noise coming from inside had changed in a way that made my chest tighten with fear. The pounding slowed down, and in the silence between each hit, I heard something else that made the situation impossible to ignore. I leaned closer to the box and noticed small holes drilled into the top of the wood. The holes were uneven and rough, like they'd been made quickly with a cheap drill. When I placed my ear near one of them, I heard breathing that sounded exhausted and wet, followed by another muffled cry that confirmed a person was inside. At that moment, my body reacted before my thoughts could catch up, and I dragged the heavy box fully into the open space beside the bed, while the pounding inside became faster and louder. Before opening the box, I stayed crouched beside it while trying to think clearly about what I was about to see. My heart was beating so hard that it made it difficult to focus, but the sounds coming from inside the box were becoming frantic and desperate. Whoever was trapped inside was moving constantly, pushing against the wood with weak force that still managed to shake the lid. When I finally lifted the metal latch and pushed the lid open, the smell that came out of the box hit me first and made me cover my mouth. The woman inside was folded into the space in a way that looked painful, her knees pulled tightly to her chest and her wrists tied behind her back with thick rope. Her ankles were tied the same way, and a piece of cloth was stuffed deep into her mouth and wrapped tightly with tape that had been pressed against her skin. Her hair was tangled and stuck to her face, and when the lid opened completely, she began to scream through the gag while trying to force her body out of the box. I stepped backward in shock while she rolled onto the floor and tried to crawl toward me, even though her legs barely worked. Her eyes were wide and desperate, and she grabbed my arm with both tied hands while making broken sounds that were impossible to understand. I quickly pulled the tape and cloth away from her mouth, and the first words she forced out came in a hoarse voice that sounded damaged from too much screaming. "Help me! Please, help me!" Her voice cracked while she tried to breathe between the words, and she grabbed my shoulders while shaking violently because she could barely stand on her own. Before trying to move her, I stopped for a moment and listened toward the front of the house, because the thought of Cameron returning while we were still inside made my mind race with panic. The house remained quiet, but every second that passed felt dangerous because I had no idea when he might walk through the door. The woman clung to me with both hands while her body shook from exhaustion, and when she tried to stand, her legs failed immediately, and she nearly collapsed again on the floor. Her nails scraped my arms while she struggled to keep her balance, and her breathing came in fast bursts that sounded painful. While cutting the rope around her wrists with a knife I grabbed from the dresser, I asked her who had done this to her, even though part of me already knew the answer. She stared at me with wide eyes and spoke in a low voice that sounded broken from fear. "Cameron keeps me here." When the rope finally came loose, she grabbed my shirt and held onto it with desperate strength while trying to walk beside me. We moved slowly toward the hallway because her legs were weak and she stumbled every few steps while leaning heavily on my shoulder. Halfway to the front door, she suddenly panicked again and grabbed my hair while speaking quickly through uneven breaths. "Do not leave me here. Please, do not leave me." I told her we were leaving together and kept moving toward the door while my heart pounded with fear that Cameron would return at any moment. Before opening the front door, I paused again and listened carefully for any sound of a car pulling into the driveway. When I opened the door, she leaned heavily against me while we were crossing the yard slowly because her legs were still struggling to carry her weight. Once we reached the sidewalk, she collapsed again and sat on the ground while breathing hard. I took out my phone and called the police while trying to explain what had just happened in clear words that the operator could understand. Police cars arrived within minutes, and officers rushed toward us while others moved carefully toward the house to secure the scene. Paramedics lifted the woman onto a stretcher while she kept repeating the same sentence over and over again. "Under the bed. He kept me under the bed." Cameron was arrested later that day at his workplace without knowing that everything had already fallen apart. The woman's name was Colleen Stan, and later police explained the full story to me, that she had been hidden inside that house for years. When detectives told me that detail, I felt sick to my stomach, because I'd slept in that same bed many times without realizing what had been hidden directly under me. Even now, I still remember the sound that woke me up that morning. In 1977, Colleen Stan was picked up while hitchhiking by Cameron Hooker near Red Bluff, California. Hooker held her captive for about 7 years, often locking her inside a small wooden box hidden under his bed, while people in the house lived normal lives above her. Through physical restraint and intense psychological control, he kept her imprisoned until the truth finally came out in 1984, leading to his arrest and conviction. When you were kids, what did you think when you were all alone? All parents are very careful not to leave their children alone, but at some point, they have to. What was your first time? Were you afraid? Were you relieved and happy? Did something bad happen to you? To be honest, my first time being alone was the worst. Being very young, maybe even too young to be alone for the first time, I had a horrifying experience that no child or adult should ever have in their life. An experience which I miraculously got out of alive. Because at a very young age, I knew human madness at its maximum expression. It all started when I was 11 years old. I'll be honest, I'm not a parent, and I'm not sure if that's the right age to leave a child alone. I just know that in my particular case, I was too young, and I didn't feel safe. Since I always behaved well, my parents had no problem leaving for an hour during the night to pick up my brother for a birthday party. At that point, they decided that this was the perfect opportunity for me to experience a short time of being alone, so they could see if I got into any mischief. I wanted to go with them in the car, see my brother, and fall asleep on the ride back. But I guess my parents thought it was the best thing for me, or at least that's what they told me as a kid. Once they left in the car, I turned on the TV and found an animated movie. I was very entertained and distracted, waiting for the night to pass quickly and for my parents and sibling to arrive, when suddenly I heard a loud knock on the door.
"Hey, it's me, Mom. Open the door."
I didn't know who that lady was, but I knew one thing for sure. That wasn't my mom. I had no idea who she was, but she was scaring me very much. The banging and screaming of that lady was getting more and more violent. She wanted to get into the house at all costs, screaming desperately for me to open the door for my mother. She said that she was my mother and she was going to take care of me, that if I didn't open the door, she was going to be very angry with me and she'd have to punish me. For a moment, I thought about opening the door, just out of fear that she would come in anyway. But I remembered what my parents had told me. I should never open the door for any stranger, no matter what they tell me. Opening the door only makes things worse. At that instant, the noises at the door stopped and I calmed down, thinking it was all over. I ran to the dining room window and opened it just to see if the terrifying woman was gone. Maybe with a little luck, I could see her leaving and then tell my parents. The lady was in front of the window. She'd already seen me. She was staring at me with a huge, twisted smile, trembling with anticipation and nerves.
Hey, kid, why don't you open it for me? Don't you recognize me? Hi, Mom.
Scared, I ran as fast as I could to my room to hide. I turned off the light and got under my sheets, but soon I realized that this was a lousy hiding place. So I got out of my sheets and went under my bed. Come to think of it, that hiding place wasn't much better. But can you blame me? I was an 11-year-old boy being harassed by a woman who was trying to break into my house. I stayed under the bed, crying quietly, when I heard a crash at the window. From my room, I could see everything that was going on. The glass had suddenly exploded and a brick had entered our house. Behind the brick, the woman came in, walking slowly with a huge smile on her face.
Mommy's home. Where are you, little boy? Are you hiding so you won't eat your vegetables?
The woman began to look everywhere, slowly scanning the house for me. I feel that I could have escaped several times, but I didn't dare to do so. With the excuse of looking for the best time to escape through the window, I missed several opportunities where I could have ran. I was terrified. I didn't know if I could have run, even if I had the perfect opportunity. After a few minutes, it was finally time to search my room.
I feel the naughty boy is here. Come out, come out. I promise not to do anything to you. Come out, little brat. Come out now, or I swear I'll break your legs. Do you want to make your mom look ridiculous in front of all these people? Do you think this is a game? If I find you, I swear I'll kill you. Oh, are you under the bed? You better not be here, you little scumbag. I'll fill you full of holes. Why? Why are all my children abandoning me? I just want to be a good mother. I found you!
As soon as she found me, the woman grabbed my feet and dragged me from under the bed. With a big smile, she grabbed both of my arms and started shaking me back and forth as if trying to relax a baby, but in a total careless and painful way. From 1 second to the next, she froze. Her face had changed. Now she was looking at me with hatred and resentment.
Why did you hide from me? Is it because you don't want to take a bath?
Furious, the woman grabbed my arm while I was crying and took me to the bathroom. Without letting go of me, she turned on the faucet to the sink, and we washed our hands, and after covering it, she plunged my face into the little water that had filled up, trying to drown me.
Waste! You are trash! I didn't raise you to be a filthy insect. You're just like your father, a useless, filthy scum! You horrible, filthy little brat!
Luckily, there was too little water to drown me, and in an oversight of the woman, I bit her hand and ran away as fast as I could. I ran around the house looking for the door, but it was locked. I turned around and the woman was standing there staring at me, this time with a knife in her hands.
Hey, I'll forgive you for what you did to me. I just want to be with you. Come.
Crying, I ran desperately to the window as the woman chased me. Surprisingly, she was much slower than I was, as if she had trouble walking. I ran to my neighbor's house crying while the woman screamed at me from the house.
No! Come back! Why are you leaving me? I did everything I could. I'm sorry.
I tried to tell the neighbors everything, but there was no need. They were already listening to the woman, screaming in desperation and panic. Shortly after my parents arrived with my brother, they were surprised to see the police at my house. As soon as they saw me, they hugged me, crying, asking me to forgive them for leaving me alone. Once the police entered my house, they found the strange woman sitting on the floor of my room, hugging a teddy bear. She said it was her son, and that they were not going to take him away from her. As she said this, she was stabbing the bear with a huge knife all over its body. The woman was immediately taken to a mental institution. When I grew up, my parents told me that, like me, This woman was also a victim. She had lost a pregnancy due to an act of violence by her partner, and she was never able to come to her senses. It just got worse and worse and worse over time. Her family tried to take care of her without taking her to a mental health center, but it was too much for them, and a few days before, she'd slipped away. Today, I feel empathy for the woman. She didn't really have any bad intentions towards me, but she was totally out of her mind. To tell you the truth, it took me years to encourage myself to be alone. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about that woman. I remember it like it was yesterday. In those moments, I just smile and am glad to be alive.
My name is Emily Griffin, and for as long as I can remember, my family and I took a 2-week trip up to a modern cabin home out in the woods every winter. This was always an attempt to have quality family time away from the city noise and closer to nature. The cabin itself was located in a pretty secluded area, but it wasn't the only one there. There were 2 similar homes not too far from ours. The caretaker of all 3 houses, Mr. Harris, was one of the neighbors, and I had a pretty good relationship with him. We'd seen each other almost every year since I was born, and in a sense, he was basically a second father to me. Quite frankly, Mr. Harris was one of the reasons I was always so eager to come up to the cabin home, as he had always been an important person to me and my parents. The other neighbor, however, was a man named Jake Cohen. While I didn't know that much about Jake, I knew he'd only come into the area 2 years ago and wasn't really the social type in any way. Call it intuition, but there was always something off about Jack, so I usually tried my best to avoid him and stay out of his way. However, all that changed on the 3rd of December 2021, the night my parents left me at home alone. The day before the incident was pretty gloomy, as the snow had come early and fast that year. My parents and I had already been at the cabin for about a week and a half at the time, and up until then, everything was going according to plan. To be honest, as much as I loved our little getaway tradition, some days seemed particularly boring. And I'd find myself constantly checking my friends' Instagram to see how much fun they were having without me. Sadly, this was one of those days. After spending time on my phone, I decided to go upstairs and watch the snow from the balcony, as it was the only spot in the house where I could see everything. The snow falling that day made the view absolutely breathtaking. Everything was completely covered in white, and for a minute, it got so quiet that I forgot I wasn't alone. The sound of a door being closed cut through the air, shortly followed by a weird, faint noise that seemed to be coming from behind Jack's house. I couldn't tell what the sound was, but it didn't take too long before it stopped, and a tall figure emerged from behind the house. The man was dressed in all black, and from where I was seated, it was impossible to tell who it was. After a few seconds of pondering, I eventually concluded that it was most likely Jack. While I couldn't tell if it was him, I already knew he was fond of going out at odd times. I wasn't completely sure, however, as something about the man and the way he moved through the snow gave off this terrifyingly eerie feel. While I usually preferred to stay out of things like that, I had to know what was going on. So against my better judgment, I continued to watch as the man slowly walked away from the house before stopping and standing completely still. The sight of the strange man in the snow was already creepy enough, but the fact that he simply stood out there without moving and looked into the darkness began to send chills down my spine. Again, against my better judgment, I decided to get closer to try to figure out what he was doing. But before I could move, his head spun swiftly in my direction. While I would have loved to believe differently, it was eerily obvious that the man was staring directly at me. The darkness covered all of his face and didn't allow me to see much of his features, but the only thing I knew for a fact was that his eyes were steadily fixed on me. Without even thinking twice, I immediately ran indoors, covered the windows, and went downstairs to my parents, where it was safe. Before going to bed that night, I decided there was no point in saying anything that would bother my parents. But I lay in bed and my mind raced before eventually coming to the obvious conclusion that the man had to be Jack. I mean, it wasn't the first time I had this exact type of interaction with him. The only difference being, this time, the darkness added to his already creepy vibe and made it seem like something it wasn't. That explanation was the only thing that made sense to me that night. and it was also the only reason I was able to calm down and get some sleep. The next morning, everything was back to normal, and there didn't seem to be any signs that the man from last night had done anything wrong. I decided to go downstairs and get some breakfast, but before I could start my eating, my mom hurried up to me and said, "Listen, honey, I know sometimes it gets boring for you being out here with just us, but it's not safe for you to be sneaking in and out of the house at 2 a.m. The confusion on my face must have been evident, because before I could even ask what she was talking about, she continued, "Don't even think about denying it, Emily. You nearly woke your father up when you were coming up the stairs last night. Now, I'd like to keep this between us, but I don't want you doing something like that again, okay?" I simply nodded my head as she gave me a kiss and said, "Oh, and by the way, your father and I are headed into town tonight for dinner your dad has to attend. We tried to get out of it, but it's important, so we'll probably be back early tomorrow morning." I smiled and nodded again as she walked away, but in my head I was still trying to figure out what she was talking about. Nothing she said made sense to me, and for a brief second, I thought about my encounter with Jack the previous night. That couldn't have had anything to do with what my mom heard, though, so I simply decided there was no point in dwelling on it. At around 6 p.m. that evening, my parents left for the meeting, leaving me home in the cabin for the first time ever. Understandably, the thought of inviting a few friends over crossed my mind, but that was impossible as I didn't know anyone my age in the area. After the next few hours, I realized there was absolutely nothing to do in the cabin alone, so I spent about 30 minutes on my phone before deciding to go downstairs and watch the movie Gone with the Wind for probably the 8th time that week. About 6 minutes after the movie started, the sound of a knock on the window sent shivers down my spine and echoed through the entire living room. The knock had come out of nowhere, and the fact that I was alone in the house made the situation even more terrifying than it already was. At first, I tried to brush it off as me hearing things, but before I could continue the movie, there it was again, the knocking. I wasn't sure what to do at that moment, as images from the encounter with Jack last night came flooding back. I sat frozen with fear for about 2 minutes, and eventually, the final knock came from the window before I decided it was better to go upstairs and lock myself in my room. The house was dead silent now, and I could feel the tension in the cold air as I got up to leave. After turning off the TV, I began to slowly walk towards the stairs when the sound of breaking glass filled the room and a massive rock landed on the floor. I screamed in terror before running up the stairs, quickly picking up my phone and calling my mom. "Hey, honey, are you? Mom, there's someone in the house," I whispered, interrupting her. My voice was breaking and tears began filling my eyes as I thought about what would happen to me. "Wait, what do you mean someone's in the house? Do they have a gun? Are you hurt?" My mother's concern was obvious, but her questions only made me more stressed, so I said, "Mom, I'm fine. Can you just come home, please?" "Okay, listen, Emily. Call Mr. Harris and tell him to come over right now. Your father and I will call the police and be back as soon as we can. So call Mr. Harris first, okay?" I immediately ended the call before finding and calling Mr. Harris, but he didn't answer. My hands were shaking now, and I decided to call again as I didn't have another option. And he was probably already asleep. He answered the phone this time, and I could hear the tiredness in his voice as he said, "Is everything all right, Emily?" I quickly responded saying, "No, sir. You need to come to my house right now. I can't say too much, but there's someone here, and I'm scared, so please just come." Mr. Harris's tired voice immediately turned to concern as he said, "Okay, stay calm. Don't leave where you are until I call you again. I'll be there soon," and ended the call. Mr. Harris called me about 4 minutes later to tell me he was at the door. I quickly went downstairs to let him in, and as I opened the door crying, he hugged me before saying, "It's okay, darling. Did you see who it was? Did he hurt you?" I showed him the living room window and the rock on the floor before telling him about the situation with Jack the previous night and how I thought it could be the same person. Mr. Harris didn't seem too shocked by what I said about Jack. He told me that people who stayed there in the summer also complained about Jack lurking at night. He promised he'd speak to Jack in the morning to see what he had to say. It wasn't long before the police showed up to make sure I was okay. I told them about what happened with the knocking and the rock, and Mr. Harris spoke to them briefly before assuring me they'd already looked around the house and he was sure whoever it was wouldn't be back that night. Somehow that didn't make me feel better. but I was obviously still shaken up. So Mr. Harris said, "Hey, why don't I stay with you tonight? You can call your parents and tell them not to worry. Just go and get some rest, and I'll be here if you need me." Mr. Harris was always so kind to me, and I knew my parents would be on the road for a while, so I called them to tell them not to worry, as Mr. Harris was already here. They were understandably still concerned, but after ensuring them I was fine, they calmed down and told me they'd be home first thing in the morning, and I should probably get some rest. I wasn't sure how I would get any rest, as I was still worried whoever it was would come back to the house, but the fact that Mr. Harris was downstairs calmed me down more than I expected. And soon enough, I was in bed trying to fall asleep. At around 2 a.m., I woke up abruptly to the sound of footsteps approaching my bedroom. The paranoia I felt earlier that night came back, and my mind began racing as my bedroom door opened, and the presence of another person looming over me was evident. Different thoughts filled my mind about how they got into the house and what happened to Mr. Harris downstairs. But all those questions left my mind as the person began touching me. I turned immediately to take his hands off me and was met by the shocking sight of Mr. Harris standing over my bed with a knife. "Calm down, little girl. Do you know how long I've waited for this moment?" he said, sitting on the bed and moving closer to me. "How long I've waited for you to mature into this beautiful little thing you are today." Tears began to fill my eyes as the horrific realization of what was about to happen dawned on me. Please no. Why are you doing this to me?" I asked as Mr. Harris grabbed my arms. The look in his eyes was the same as always, and I began to wonder if he'd ever really been hiding who he was, or if I'd just known him for so long that I couldn't see who he really was. "See, Emily, I can't think of a greater pleasure than seeing the life I saw grow inside you all these years slip away slowly after I've had my fun with you. Honestly, I would have done it last year, but your stupid parents never leave. So I had to wait until today when luckily you were home alone." A huge grin formed on his face, and before I knew it, he held me down and began hitting and touching me as I screamed. Luckily, before he could go any further, I kicked him in the groin and bolted out of the room as he screamed in pain. Running was all I could do, so I ran out of my room, ran downstairs, and before I knew it, I was out of the house and into the snow. The cold air immediately filled my lungs, and suddenly it became 10 times harder to move without falling. I could hear Mr. Harris behind me now, so I looked back for a second at the horrific sight of the 6-foot man chasing me down with nothing but a blade and devilish intent in his eyes. After a while, it became more difficult to trudge through the snow. I could barely breathe. With every step, my feet began to hurt, and the snow had begun to hold me back harder. I tried to keep going as hard as I could, but eventually I couldn't run anymore, and I fell. Mr. Harris was on top of me in a matter of seconds, and before I could do anything, I felt the force of his fists against my face again and again, before he eventually stopped and stared, laughing while letting out heavy, quick breaths. "Fuck you, fucking little bitch!" he screamed while pointing at me. I could barely see anything, but I could tell he had picked up the knife and was about to stab me. Tears ran down my face as I prepared for what was about to happen. But before he could stab me, I heard a heavy thud, and before I knew it, Mr. Harris fell off me unconscious. I couldn't tell what had happened, and I didn't have much time to figure it out, as not long after, I began to see less and less until eventually everything went dark. I woke up the next morning at the Ellie Bloomington Community Hospital in Minnesota. It was the only hospital in the area, and I was told by my parents that Jack had found me last night and brought me to the hospital. I told my parents everything that happened that night, and they broke down in tears. I could tell that in some way they felt responsible for bringing a man like Mr. Harris into my life. The police came later that day to ask me questions, and after speaking to them, they told me they'd spoken to Jack earlier that day, and after looking around, they'd discovered a secret shed behind Jack's house where Mr. Harris had stored guns and mementos from other victims. This would explain why whenever people saw him leaving, they would assume it was Jack, and end up complaining about the odd movements to Mr. Harris himself. The estate's cameras around our house had also captured Mr. Harris lurking outside my living room window before knocking numerous times and eventually throwing the brick through the window. Further investigations were carried out into Mr. Harris and his victims, and after a year, He was sentenced to life without parole by the Minnesota police. Although I avoided all trials and anything to do with him, it brought me great relief to know he was rotting away for the rest of his life. It's been 3 years now, and despite the fact I'm 21 years old, the nightmares don't seem to be going away anytime soon. And I haven't been alone since the horrific day I was home alone with Mr. Harris.
I still remember when I lived in that place. I didn't move in because I liked the place. I moved in because it was the only thing I could afford without roommates. A one-bedroom apartment, second floor, cracked tiles, water stains on the ceiling, no decoration, no personality, just 4 walls and a door I could lock. I worked night shifts at a shipping facility. I liked being alone, or I thought I did. The building was mostly empty. A lot of tenants came and went. The ones who stayed never talked. My neighbor across the hall, maybe in his 60s, stared every time I walked past, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. I ignored him. Didn't need friends, just quiet and sleep. I barely had furniture. A mattress on the floor, a plastic table, one chair. I watched movies on my laptop. Horror stuff, mostly. The kind with cheap monsters and dumb decisions. I didn't think anything could actually scare me. I was used to silence, to dark hallways and flickering lights. Thought I'd seen enough to not care anymore. But the first time I saw it, I knew this wasn't something I could laugh off. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. I was walking home from my shift. Took the shortcut through the alley behind the building. I'd walked it 100 times. That night, someone was standing at the far end, half in the shadows, facing my direction. I slowed down, thought maybe they were drunk or lost, but they didn't move, didn't talk, just stood there. Their body was straight, arms at their sides, nothing off about the clothes, gray hoodie, jeans, but the stillness was wrong. Not frozen from fear or hesitation, just empty. I stepped wide to the left, gave them space, didn't break eye contact. They didn't even blink. As soon as I turned the corner and lost sight of them, I sprinted up the stairs, heart pounding like something was already chasing me. Inside, I locked every lock. I sat in the chair and waited. Nothing happened. I didn't hear a knock, didn't hear footsteps. Eventually, I fell asleep with the lights on and a knife beside me. Woke up the next day, told myself I was just tired, hallucinating maybe, overworked, underfed. That same night I looked out the window before bed. It was standing on the sidewalk across the street, facing my building. That was the moment I knew it wasn't random. I left the window and walked around the apartment, checked every room, even the stupid closet I never used. Nothing inside. I paced until the sun came up. When I finally looked again, it was gone. I didn't go to work. I didn't leave the apartment for 2 days. I waited to see if it would come back. And it didn't. Not right away. On the 3rd night, I took the trash out. The hallway was empty. The building was always quiet at night. When I came back up the stairs, it was standing on the same landing just below mine. Facing me. Same clothes, same posture, no expression. I didn't give it time to move. I shoved past, touched its shoulder, cold and damp like wet concrete, and ran into my apartment. I slammed the door and locked everything. I leaned against it, breathing hard. I didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear anything, but I could feel it on the other side. I pushed the table in front of the door, sat on the floor holding that same kitchen knife. I didn't sleep. Every few minutes I stood up and checked the peephole. It wasn't there. At least not in the hall. I stopped checking after I thought I saw something pass through the wall. I didn't see a full figure, just motion, like watching something underwater. I backed away, heart slamming, knife shaking in my hand. At sunrise, I opened the door and ran. I didn't pack anything. I just left. Took the bus across town, got a motel room. First thing I did was lock the window, shut the curtains, and sit with my back to the wall. I stared at the door for hours. Around 1 a.m., there was a knock. Not a bunch of them, just one. Loud, solid. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I stayed in motels for the next week, switching locations every night. Paid cash, no routine. I avoided windows, never walked alone, and still, every night, it showed up. Sometimes far away, sometimes right outside, never speaking, never running, always walking, always getting closer. I thought about fighting it. I bought a crowbar, a can of mace, even a gun off some sketchy guy in a parking lot. I was ready to use them. But when it appeared on the motel balcony, walking through the glass without shattering it, I froze. I hit it with the crowbar, the metal bent. It didn't bleed. It didn't flinch. I sprayed the mace straight into its face, and nothing. It reached for me. I fired the gun twice. The bullets went in, but didn't come out. It didn't even stumble. I jumped off the second floor, twisted my ankle when I landed, and I kept running. I spent the night hiding behind a gas station dumpster, clutching the gun like it mattered. When the sun rose, it was gone again, like it had melted into the air. I called the only person I still trusted, Marcus, an old co-worker, a good guy. Didn't ask questions, said I could crash on his couch. I didn't tell him everything, just said I was being followed. He laughed at first, but when I screamed at him not to leave me alone that night, he stopped smiling. At 3 a.m., the doorbell rang. Marcus went to check, and I begged him not to open it. He said there was no one there, no car, no sound, but when I looked out the window, it was standing in the middle of the road, staring. Then it took one step forward. I ran again. Back to my apartment. I know it doesn't make sense, but I was tired. Tired of running, tired of pretending I could get away. I figured if it was going to kill me, I'd rather die somewhere familiar. I stayed inside for 3 days. Didn't answer my phone, didn't eat, just waited. On the 4th night, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not loud, not fast, just steady. One step, then another. I stood behind the door holding a knife in one hand and a hammer in the other. The footsteps stopped. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. I turned around and nearly screamed. It was inside. It stood at the end of the hallway, between me and the bedroom. No broken glass, no sound. It had passed through the door like it wasn't even there. I threw the hammer. It hit the thing's face with a dull crack and fell to the floor, but it didn't react. I stabbed it in the stomach. The blade sank in, but there was no blood, no twitch. It raised its arm slow and steady, and reached for my face. I ran into the bedroom, slammed the door, and shoved the dresser in front of it. Then I locked myself in the bathroom. I sat in the tub, knife shaking in my hand, and waited. Hours passed. Then I heard the door creak open. The bedroom. Then footsteps, slower than before. Not because it was tired, because it knew it had nowhere left to go. The handle turned. I pressed myself against the back wall of the tub. The door opened and it stepped into the bathroom, one foot after the other. No speed, no rush, just walking. I stabbed at its leg, but it didn't even slow down. It kept moving forward, cornering me. The knife dropped. My arm went numb. Its hand reached for my face, and then everything went black. I woke up in the bathtub, daylight leaking in through the bathroom window. My apartment was empty. The door was open. The walls were marked with long black smears, burn marks almost, but nothing else. I stumbled out bleeding from my hand. My clothes were soaked in cold sweat. The thing was gone. I didn't waste time. I packed a bag, took everything I could carry, and left. Moved 4 states away, got a new name, a new job, an apartment with 24-hour security and cameras in every hall. I haven't seen it since, but I still still jump when I hear slow footsteps, because it didn't die. It never stops. I don't think it can be killed. I think it just chooses when to show up. And maybe it's giving me time. Maybe it's just letting me get comfortable, letting me believe I'm safe. That's the worst part, not knowing if tonight is the night it walks through my wall again. I've stopped trying to explain it. No one would believe me anyway. I've moved 5 times in 6 months. No patterns, no trail. Still, I always check every window, every alley, every reflection, just in case it shows up again. I'm tired, and I'm really afraid. Afraid that someday I'll give up and won't run anymore.
I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of Seattle. I bought it 2 years ago, taking advantage of a good price in the area's tranquility. A dead-end street surrounded by tall trees and few neighbors. It was perfect for someone like me, a person who doesn't like people. My routine is pretty simple. I work from home as a programmer. I go out a couple of times a week to go shopping or running, and from time to time, I get visits from friends, although they are becoming less frequent. Sometimes the nights were too quiet, but I learned to get used to it. This year's winter was harsher than usual. Temperatures dropped lower than expected, and the days seemed to end before they began. Under these conditions, the house began to feel bigger and colder. Everything was normal, boring, but that wasn't a bad thing. I like boring, but nothing lasts forever, and bad things always come. I first noticed it one night while trying to sleep. I heard a faint noise, like someone walking barefoot down the hallway. I got up and quickly checked with a flashlight I keep nearby for when I lose things under furniture. I looked for the source of the noise, but there was nothing. Surely it must have been the wind or the echo of my imagination, I thought. But that was just the beginning. That same week, the little noises became more constant, but I could never find anything. I came to think they were noises from the house, maybe from outside. But they weren't. And that overconfidence almost killed me. On a Friday, it was close to midnight when I heard a thud coming from the kitchen. Not a creak or a scrape, but something much more definite, as if someone had dropped something heavy. I rushed downstairs with an aluminum bat I kept in my room. I turned on the lights in the dining room, but nothing was out of place. However, when I got to the kitchen, I noticed something strange. The knife I left on the counter the night before was now on the floor. I picked it up and put it back in its place, feeling ridiculously paranoid. I tried to convince myself that it had been an oversight, but as I walked back upstairs to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. That early morning, I didn't sleep. The most disturbing sound came around 3 a.m, a low, barely audible whisper that seemed to come from the hallway outside my room. I didn't dare open that door. At that moment, I didn't even think about grabbing the bat. I was afraid, and I felt like no matter how prepared I was in the hallway, something bad would happen to me. On Saturday, I decided to check the house thoroughly. I looked for possible points of entry, improperly closed windows, or anything that would explain the noises. I found nothing. Everything was in order, and the locks were intact. Still, the uneasy feeling didn't go away. To distract myself, I spent the rest of the day watching shows and not thinking too much. In the evening, the noises returned, but this time they were different. It wasn't just a thump or a creak. It was footsteps. Slowly, they moved from the living room to the dining room and then up the stairs. I grabbed the aluminum bat and opened the door to my room. I couldn't let fear get the better of me. Someone had broken into my house, and they were surely taking advantage of my fear. I went down the stairs carefully, shining the flashlight down the hallway. When I reached the second floor, everything was silent. I checked every nook and cranny, but there was no sign of anything or anyone. Then I noticed something that wasn't there before. On the living room window, there was a mark. 5 parallel lines drawn on the glass, as if someone had made them with fingernails. I didn't stay to investigate it much. I quickly went upstairs, locked the door, and blocked out the night with the noise of the television. I slept very little, but the next morning brought something stranger. On the kitchen floor, I found wet footprints. They were small, as if they belonged to a child, and led from the back door into the hallway. Sunday was a heavier day. I decided to install security cameras in the house. I bought a couple from a nearby store and placed them in the living room, along with the dining room and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. At night, I sat in front of the monitor, hoping to capture something that would explain what was happening. After 2 o'clock in the morning, I saw something on the cameras. In the dining room, just at the edge of the viewing box, something moved. It was a shadow, or rather a barely distinguishable figure. It had a humanoid shape, but it moved irregularly as if each movement was forced. I left my room quickly, bat in hand and cell phone in the other. I cautiously went downstairs, but there was no one there. The house was completely silent, except for a sound coming from the kitchen. A low, choppy breathing. I approached the threshold, holding the bat tightly. I turned on the light, but no one was there. However, the back door was open, which was impossible because I always locked it. Something or someone had been inside the house. The cameras began to emit alerts again. First one, then another, until they all indicated movement in different parts of the house. I looked at the monitor with my heart pounding in my chest. In the living room, one of the figures was completely motionless in front of the camera, as if he knew he was being watched. In the dining room, 2 other smaller figures were moving slowly, pausing in front of the furniture. As soon as I understood what was happening and prepared to run, something invisible grabbed my arm and threw me against the wall. I felt the impact on my side and the bat slip from my hands. Before I could react, a force picked me up again and threw me to the other end of the room. My body slammed into a shelf, which collapsed. Leave me alone! Then they appeared. Not one, but 3 of those beings surrounding me. They were the shadows. I could see them. One of them came close enough to lift me off the floor. It picked me up as if I were a rag doll and threw me against the wall once again. The blow knocked the wind out of me, and the pain spread throughout my body. Before I could sit up, another being grabbed my legs and dragged me across the floor. My back hit the floor as I was carried towards the dining room. I tried to kick, to struggle, but their strength was enormous. I was violently dropped onto the table, which cracked under my weight. The others joined in, lifting me and throwing me against the furniture again and again. My head was spinning. The blows kept coming, as if they were having fun with me, playing games. In a second's pause, I saw the 3 beings stop, looking down at me from above, almost expectantly. Bleeding and sore, I took advantage of that brief instant. With what little strength I had left, I staggered to my feet and ran to the nearest window. Without a second thought, I jumped out. From there, I looked back. The beings were in the window frame, standing still, watching me. They made no attempt to follow me. At that moment, I understood. They didn't want to catch me. All that time, they were just playing with me, crawling and in pain. I called the police from my car. But when they arrived, they found nothing. The cameras had been destroyed, and there was no sign of the intruders. They didn't believe me, and I didn't blame them. That same night, I decided to stay in a motel. I spent the whole night crying, and when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed about the house again. In my dream, I was outside the house looking at it. From inside the house, the shadows were still standing. In the dream, I was walking, hypnotized to the house. And suddenly, the dream ended. When I woke up, I was in the courtyard of the house, where my dream had ended. That same day, I went back to my parents' house. I asked them to hide my car keys and to lock the doors at night. I sold the house a few months later, at a ridiculously low price. I didn't tell the new owners anything that had happened. I needed it out of my life. I still dream about the house at night. But this time, I don't try to go inside. In my dreams, I'm outside the house, watching the people I sold it to screaming from inside, crying. I always wake up drenched in sweat. And there are days when I want to call that family just to see if they're okay. After a few minutes of consideration, I always decide not to.
What were you afraid of when you were kids? My fears were not unlike those of any ordinary child. Dark monsters, ghosts, and all things we don't understand and think will hurt us. I have to say that these fears were taken away from me at an early age to be replaced by something much more sinister. That day that changed my fear, I was visited by the most tetric, cruel, and real being that can exist. The human being. I will tell you about that night. I was only 12 years old, too young to be able to defend myself, but too old to need a babysitter. I was going to be alone for a short time since my parents had gone to buy a few things from the supermarket. I was in my room, playing with my toys on the floor. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise coming from the living room. I stood up annoyed. I honestly thought it was my parents. Surely they had forgotten something. I was grounded that day, so I wasn't supposed to play with my toys, and now I was sure to be discovered. I started to put away all my toys as fast as I could, hoping to hide everything in time. But if they had come back to check that I hadn't done anything, they would surely discover me. Time went by and my parents didn't come into my room, which seemed very strange to me. They always came into my room as soon as they arrived, since they had recently decided that I no longer needed a babysitter. But they were still a little paranoid. As time went by, I kept hearing footsteps, and at that moment, I realized one thing. It was only one person walking. I quickly looked out my bedroom window and noticed something that gave me goosebumps. My parents' car was gone. My parents hadn't come home yet. I looked through the half-open door of my room and saw a dark figure moving. That person wasn't either of my parents. It was something else. I stood still, trying to understand what I was seeing. The figure was moving slowly through the living room. He was not wearing a mask or anything to hide his face. It was a man, tall and thin, with a smile that chilled my blood. I didn't know this man. I knew he was probably a thief, but something about him made me even more uneasy. At that time, I was too young to understand what bothered me so much about that person, but now I understand. What I was too young to notice at the time was the man's behavior. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't in a hurry, and he definitely wasn't afraid. He was having fun. To make it even worse, at that time, I also didn't realize that the man wasn't really stealing anything. He wasn't inspecting the drawers, he didn't have a bag or a backpack, and he didn't intend to run away as soon as he saw someone. The man was not looking for something, he was looking for someone. As I told you, at that moment, I was too young to make the right decisions in the face of something like that. I was paralyzed, my hands were sweating, and I felt a strong stitch in my chest that did not let me breathe. At that moment, I should have hidden, ran, screamed for help. Whatever I could have done was better than what I did. Faced with that strange figure wandering around my house, I just stood there, staring at him as if I was totally exposed. The man saw me, and his smile widened. I ran back to my room, closed the door, and hid under my bed. I heard his footsteps approaching, slow but sure. The door to my room opened slowly. I tried to hold my breath, but my heart was pounding so hard, I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. Once the man entered my room, I became much more nervous and almost gave a little scream. I was surprised that the man had entered my room as if my unlocked door had put up any kind of impediment for him to do so. Once he entered the room, I could watch from under my bed as the door slowly closed. He didn't need to close it that slowly, but he was doing so that I heard the door creak and became even more desperate. A few seconds after the door closed, the light went out as well. The light was still coming through my bedroom window, so he went over to close it. We were both in absolute darkness. I could no longer see anything, and I was sure he couldn't either, which I considered an advantage. Now that I am an adult, I realize that this was part of his game. He enjoyed both of us not seeing anything. He had the situation under control, because even if I escaped through the door, he would hear me do it and jump at me before I got away. In the best case scenario, I could run a few meters down the hallway and he would catch me there. This really was a no-win situation. From 1 second to the next, I felt a weight on top of my bed. At first, I thought the man had laid down, but I quickly realized that the weight was concentrated on just one part of the bed. The man was standing on top of it. My panic at that moment was overshadowed by my difficulty breathing. The bed was somewhat old, and when he climbed on top, I was crushed to the floor. I couldn't resist my urge to cry, so I cried softly. I thought he didn't hear me, but today I realized that with the silence, it was impossible not to. He knew perfectly well where I was. Suddenly, the bed became lighter and I could breathe. I was relieved. I began to breathe deeper and relax. Almost for a second, I forgot about the psychopath in my room. But that relief didn't last long. At that instant, laughter was sounding from under the bed with me. The man was lying on the floor next to me. I froze, and without holding back, I began to cry. Next to me, the man pretended to be crying, mocking me. I couldn't see him as I had my back to him, but I felt his warmth next to me. Then I began to feel something walking around my waist. It was one of my toy soldiers. The soldier was poking me with his plastic gun. Even though it wasn't sharp, the pressure caused me pain. It started to hurt more and more and more as I cried nonstop, and the psycho's laughter rang out throughout the room, until suddenly there came a thread of hope. I heard my parents' car pulling up to the house. I used that moment to react, and I shot out from under the bed, escaping my room. I ran, crying desperate without looking back. The man could have caught me if he wanted to, but I never heard his footsteps behind me. He never tried to catch me.
Mom! Dad, help me!
What happened, darling?
Did you get hurt? Are you okay?
A man! There's a horrible and big man in the house. He's in my bedroom.
They quickly went to my room, but there was no one there. Just a dark room and an open window. Over the next few days, my parents checked the cameras more frequently, and to their terror, we were able to experience at least for a few seconds what I experienced. A few days after the incident, the man approached the camera, staring at it and smiling, as if provoking them, as if to say that whenever he wants, he can come back and take me away. We moved a few months later. My parents couldn't bear the thought of the man coming back one day. Do you know what helped them make the final decision? A few days after it all happened, a note appeared under my window. The note was addressed to me and said that if my parents hadn't come home that day, he would still be playing with me.
I got home after a long shift at the warehouse. My routine was simple. Unlock the door, throw the keys on the table, and settle in for a quiet night. I was tired, but looking forward to a cup of coffee and some mindless TV. Nothing in my day hinted at what was coming next. The apartment is modest, a small space with a living room, a one-bedroom, and a cramped kitchen. I lived here for a few years, and every creak and sound was familiar to me. I trusted the lock I'd installed, and I rarely worried about interruptions in a quiet neighborhood like mine. Life was predictable. I dropped my bag by the sofa and headed to the kitchen. I heated up some leftovers in the microwave. The hum of the appliance and the clink of cutlery were all part of an ordinary evening. I sat down to eat, expecting nothing more than a calm night. After dinner, I turned on the TV and relaxed in the living room. I didn't think twice about the few minutes of solitude I'd earned. My mind was already on tomorrow's work, and I had no idea that the next few hours would shatter that normalcy. An hour into my evening, I noticed that the back door, which I always double-checked before leaving, was slightly ajar. I distinctly remember locking it, so the sight made my stomach tighten. I walked over to inspect it, but the door was only a few centimeters open, as if someone had pushed it gently. A few items also seemed out of place as well. On the hallway table, there was a set of keys that I didn't recognize, a set of car keys with a tag that I'd never seen. The table's surface was dusty in a patch where it shouldn't be, and a framed photo had been turned face down. These small details made me feel uneasy, even though nothing appeared to be missing. I decided to check the entire apartment. I moved from room to room, scanning every corner. The bedroom was untouched except for a slight disarray on the nightstand, and the kitchen looked as it always did except for a faint scrape on the countertop. Each discrepancy, though minor on its own, started to add up and disturb the calm of the evening. I kept telling myself it might have been a mistake, a neighbor accidentally nudging my door or a wind gust, but the evidence just didn't add up. I felt a growing pit in my stomach as I realized someone could have been here without my knowledge. I still wasn't sure what to do next, but the sense of being watched was becoming hard to ignore. While I was mulling over my next move, I heard a distinct noise from the living room, a heavy, deliberate footstep that wasn't mine. I froze by the doorway, my heart pounding harder than usual. I'd hoped it was just my imagination. But then I heard the sound again, closer this time, moving from the kitchen toward the living room. I tried to remain still, convinced that if the intruder hadn't seen me yet, maybe I could quietly call for help. I reached slowly for my phone, but before I could dial, the sound of a door handle rattling behind me made me realize that I was no longer alone. I turned and saw a dark figure slip into the living room, scanning the area as if searching for someone. In that instant, my hiding place was discovered. The intruder's eyes locked onto mine, and I had no time to react. He moved quickly, a swift, aggressive motion that left me no chance to run. His hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my scream, while his other arm grabbed my shoulder. I felt his grip tighten as he pulled me backward. Panic surged through me as I realized I was face to face with someone whose intentions were anything but benign. I struggled, but he was way too strong. In a split second, the situation shifted from unsettling to life-threatening. There was no hesitation in his actions, only a cold determination that left me helpless. He forced me to the floor with a rough shove, the impact jarring my entire body. I tried to shield myself, but his grip was relentless. The first blow came hard, a punch to my side that left me gasping for breath. I felt the shock of pain radiate through my ribs, and I knew then that this was much more than just a simple intrusion. As I lay there, dazed and disoriented, he began to search me. His hands rifled through my pockets, tossing my wallet and phone aside without care. Every movement was rough and unyielding. There was no attempt at subtlety or conversation. He was focused solely on dominating the situation, and I was completely at his mercy. He pulled my arm behind my back and forced me to crawl toward the hallway. Every inch of movement was punctuated by another brutal strike, fists hitting my back, a kick that knocked the wind out of me. I could only watch in a haze of pain as my apartment, the place I had considered safe, turned into a trap. The sound of his breathing and the grunts that accompanied each impact were harsh reminders that I was not in control. I didn't have the strength or the skill to fight back. Every attempt to push him away only made him more aggressive. The situation escalated so quickly that I felt completely overwhelmed, caught in a nightmare from which there was no waking. In the midst of the attack, I scrambled desperately to reach my phone on the floor, hoping to call for help even as each blow threatened to render me unconscious. My vision blurred with pain, and I could taste blood on my tongue as he continued to strike me without pause. The sound of my own ragged breath filled the space, a stark contrast to the silence that had preceded the chaos. He kicked me in the chest, and the impact sent me crashing against the wall. The rough surface grazed my skin, adding another layer of pain to the onslaught. I tried to curl into a protective position, but his presence was too forceful. Each strike was deliberate, as if he was intent on ensuring I would never recover. There was a moment when I thought I might lose consciousness completely, a brief, terrifying lapse where everything went dark. but the sounds of his movements, of my own heart pounding, pulled me back, keeping me aware of the brutal reality unfolding around me. I could hear my blood rushing in my ears, and every throb of pain was a reminder of my vulnerability. In those agonizing minutes, I was not a fighter or a survivor by choice. I was just a common man overwhelmed by an attacker whose purpose was clear: to hurt and subdue me. The sheer force of his aggression left no doubt that I was in direct mortal danger, and there was nothing I could do to reverse the situation in that instant. After what felt like an eternity of relentless assault, I heard a distant sound. A siren growing louder outside my apartment. The intruder paused, his grip faltering for just a second as he listened. I could see his eyes narrow, the focus shifting momentarily from my vulnerable form to the approaching noise that promised intervention. In that brief window, he cursed under his breath and pulled me roughly to my feet. Instead of finishing what he had started, he dragged me toward the front door as if deciding that the risk of being caught was too high. The sirens grew closer, and I could sense his panic mingled with anger. His grip was tight, but now his movements were more hurried and erratic. He shoved me toward the exit, leaving me dazed and bleeding, and then made a quick escape into the night. I slumped against the doorframe, barely able to stand, as I watched him vanish down the street. The sound of the approaching police filled the air, and I realized that the attack was over, even though every part of me ached from the ordeal. Within minutes, officers arrived. Their voices were calm, but firm as they assessed the scene. They took my statement and examined the disarray of my once safe home. The evidence of the violent encounter was everywhere, on the walls, on the floor, and in the bloodstains that now I had to confront. The relief of their arrival was tempered by the raw pain and terror I had endured. In the days that followed that night, I spent long hours in a hospital bed, the scars of the attack a constant reminder of my vulnerability. I had to learn to live with the physical pain, but the emotional impact was even more lasting. Every sound, every unexpected movement triggered memories of the brutal assault that left me defenseless. I have since installed a comprehensive security system and changed every lock in my apartment. The measures do little to erase the fear that lingers, but they serve as a reminder that nothing is truly safe. I now live with a heightened awareness and a reluctance to trust the ordinary routines that once brought comfort. I share this story not for sympathy, but as a stark reminder that danger can strike without warning. I was just a regular guy going about an ordinary life, until one night my world turned upside down. The attack was raw and unrelenting, a lesson in how quickly a familiar place can become hostile. Now, as I piece together the fragments of my shattered sense of security, I understand that real life can be as unpredictable and terrifying as any tale. The scars, both seen and unseen, are a constant testament to that night, a night that will forever remind me that safety is never guaranteed.
I'm Jake. I was 10 years old when this happened, and I still can't sleep without locking every door and window twice. That night, my parents had gone to a dinner party for my dad's job. They said I was old enough to stay home alone, just for a few hours. We had practiced what to do in case of emergencies. I had their numbers, knew not to open the door for anyone, and had food in the fridge. Simple. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I played video games for a while, then switched to TV. Every sound felt louder than usual. The fridge humming, the clock ticking, even the occasional creak of the wooden floor. I wasn't scared. I wasn't a little kid anymore. I had no idea that night would be the worst of my life. It started with the doorbell. It was past 9 p.m. I froze, my fingers gripping the remote. The rule was simple. Don't open the door for anyone. Ding dong. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. A man stood on the porch. He was tall, wearing a dirty brown jacket and a baseball cap. He held a plastic bag in his hand. When he noticed me, he smiled. His teeth were yellow. "Hey, kid, I got some candy for you. Come on, open up." I didn't move. My heart was pounding. He wasn't a delivery guy. He wasn't a neighbor. I shook my head and backed away. "Don't be shy, kid. It's free." I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the cordless phone. I started dialing my mom's number, but before I could press call, he was hitting the door now. I locked the front door earlier, but was that enough? I checked the back door. Locked. Windows shut. The pounding on the door got louder, more violent. My hands were shaking as I held the phone and pressed call. The dial tone rang in my ear, but no one picked up. "Open up, kid. Just take some candy and I'll leave. All the kids got some." The man's voice was calm, almost friendly, but the way he hit the door told a different story. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself small, trying to disappear. Silence. I held my breath. Maybe he had left. Maybe. The doorknob rattled. My stomach clenched as I bolted up the stairs, taking two at a time. My parents' room had a lock. If I could just make it there. The sound of wood splintering behind me sent a chill through my body. He was inside. I reached my parents' room and locked the door, pressing my ear against it. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway. He was in my house. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, but there was no signal. I tried again. Nothing. My only option was to hide. The closet. I squeezed inside, shutting the door just as I heard the bedroom door creak open. My breathing was too loud. I pressed my hand against my mouth, my chest rising and falling too quickly. The floor creaked as he moved around the room. I saw his shadow through the crack in the door. He was right there. My whole body tensed. "You know, you should always accept free gifts. It's rude to say no." The closet door shook violently. My heart pounded against my ribs as I gripped the handle with all my strength, but I knew it wouldn't hold for long. The door burst open. A rough hand grabbed my wrist, yanking me out of the closet. I kicked, twisted, and clawed at his arm, but his grip was too strong. My nails scraped against his skin, but he barely reacted. My screams filled the room, but no one was there to hear them. "Stop fighting! You'll like the candy!" I thrashed wildly, my foot connecting with his shin. He grunted, loosening his grip just enough for me to wrench free. I ran, nearly tripping over myself as I bolted for the stairs. The front door was shattered. If I could just make it outside. I barely reached the last step before something slammed into my back, knocking me to the floor. His weight pressed down on me as he grabbed my arms. I screamed, kicked, twisted. My teeth found his hand, and I bit down as hard as I could. He howled in pain, releasing me for just a second. That was all I needed. I scrambled to my feet and ran out the door, my legs barely holding me up as I sprinted towards the street. I ran barefoot down the driveway, the cold pavement stinging my feet. My lungs burned as I pushed forward, not daring to look back. Behind me, I heard the van's engine roar to life. Tires screeched. He was coming after me. A hand grabbed the back of my shirt, yanking me backwards. I gasped as my feet left the ground. I kicked and flailed, trying to break free. The van's door was open. He was trying to shove me inside. Desperation surged through me. I twisted my head and sank my teeth into his wrist harder than before. The taste of blood filled my mouth. He shrieked, dropping me. I hit the pavement and rolled, pain exploding through my shoulder, but I didn't stop. I ran straight into the street. Bright headlights blinded me. Tires screeched to a stop inches away. My heart pounded as I turned back. The man was gone. I was lost. I ran through unfamiliar streets, too scared to stop. Every shadow felt like him. Every noise made me jump. I hid behind trash cans, inside bushes, shivering from the cold, my bare feet covered in dirt. Hours passed. My body ached, exhaustion creeping in. But I couldn't stop it. He was still out there, looking for me. Then I heard voices. My name. My parents. I stumbled towards them, tears streaming down my face. My mom collapsed around me, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. My dad was already on the phone with the police. They searched, but the man was gone. I never saw him again. Nobody ever found him. Not that I know. But I still don't take candy from strangers. I don't even eat candy anymore.
My name is Alec Robertson, and when I was 9 years old, I thought the scariest thing about being home alone was running out of cookies before my parents got back. That was all before the night that changed everything I thought I knew about my family, our house in Maine, and my dad. But let me start where it really begins. I grew up believing we moved from California to Maine because my dad had gotten a better job. That's what he always told me. Accounting may not be glamorous, buddy, but it pays the bills, he'd say with a laugh whenever I asked too many questions. At 5 years old, I didn't know what glamorous even meant, so I figured moving across the country for accounting made perfect sense. Our new home in Maine was a 2-story place with a big, fully furnished basement. Honestly, it was the best place for a kid. My older brother, Mike, who was 5 years older, turned the basement into our fort, our hockey rink, our wrestling arena, and sometimes a place where I stored my action figures so he wouldn't steal them. By the time I turned 9, my parents started letting me stay home alone for a few hours when they were out. It made me feel responsible, grown up, almost invincible. All I really did was eat more cookies than legally recommended and watch cartoons until my eyes felt sore. But hey, freedom is freedom. In our neighborhood, safe as it gets, a quiet suburban town in mid-Maine. But then came that night. Mid-November, snow was coming down hard, my parents were on a date, Mike was out with friends, and I, Alec Robertson, age 9, was king of the house. I'd already eaten dinner and I was deep into my cartoon marathon when I heard it. Knock. A single, dull knock. From the basement. Now, if you've ever watched a horror movie, and trust me, even at 9 I'd seen more than I should have, you know the first rule is simple. Don't investigate noises, call 911, stay alive. But this was my basement, my childhood kingdom. Nothing scary ever happened there. So I went downstairs. The lights flicked on with a hum. Everything looked normal. The old couch Mike had ripped a hole in, still ripped. Our toys scattered, but in the usual way. The cabinet in the back where Dad kept his boring papers, closed and locked. And the basement door leading to the backyard, also locked. Plus, the wind had been making the house groan all evening. I figured the noise was just another one of those winter sounds. Relieved, I turned to go back upstairs. And that's when things got weird. 10 minutes later, bang! A sharp, violent sound from downstairs. Not a creak, not a thump, something slamming. My heart went into overdrive. I dropped my cookies. I didn't even think. I sprinted upstairs into my parents' room, locked the door, and grabbed the phone. It rang twice. "Alec, everything okay?" My mom answered. No, Mom, there was a noise in the basement, really loud, and I think someone's..." "Alec, calm down," Dad interrupted gently. "What did you hear?" "It wasn't like before. It was loud, like someone's down there." "We're coming home. Stay in the room. Don't move." "But..." "We'll be there soon. Lock the door." Click. They sounded calm, but something in Dad's voice, it was tight, urgent, like he already knew something was wrong. Minutes later, though it felt like hours, I heard sirens outside. My parents and the cops arrived almost at the same time. Mom ran upstairs and wrapped me in the kind of hug that almost cracked ribs. "Oh, sweetheart, you're okay," she whispered, but her voice trembled. Downstairs, I could hear Dad talking to the officers. His voice was low, serious. Then, "What the hell?" Dad muttered loud enough that even upstairs I heard it. Mom squeezed me tighter. When the police finally came back up, their faces said everything. Confusion, concern, and something else. Something like fear. Dad didn't say much as he drove us to a motel that night, but I remember one thing clearly. I asked him, "What did you find in the basement?" He paused for a long moment before answering, "Nothing for you to worry about, buddy. We're safe. That's what matters." But I didn't miss the way he avoided Mom's eyes. The next day, he told us we were moving immediately. 2 weeks later, we were in Florida. Life moved on. And that night in Maine became just a fuzzy memory, a scary story I only told occasionally, until last Thanksgiving. We were all around the dinner table. Me, Mom, Dad, and Mike. The usual family conversations were happening. And then, casually, too casually, I brought it up. "Hey, Dad, remember that night in Maine, the basement thing? You never told me what really happened." Finally, Dad sighed. He leaned back in his chair. "You're old enough to know now." I wasn't ready for what came next. "I didn't move to Maine for accounting. I moved you all there because I used to work for the CIA, and I exposed people who didn't want to be exposed." I blinked at him, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. He explained everything. How one of his operations went south, how he became a whistleblower, how powerful people were involved, how the fallout was massive, how he had evidence, copies of documents which he had kept hidden, and how, to stay safe, we were relocated to Maine under witness protection. "They spent 4 years trying to find us," Dad said quietly, "and that night, they did." I swallowed hard. "So, the basement—" Dad nodded. "They were after the documents, nothing else. When they left, they took what they came for, and we were moved again to keep you kids safe." I sat back, trying to reconcile everything. The knock, the bang, the overturned basement, the boots in the snow, the open door, the trail disappearing at the road. For years I thought it was just some burglar. Turns out it was something far bigger. Mom spoke gently. "Alec, we didn't tell you because you were young, and after Florida, things settled. We wanted you to have a normal life." Dad added softly, "I believed them. The threat was gone, but if that were true, why did Dad still glance out windows like he was waiting for someone to show up? Why did Mom still double-check every lock every night? And why, every now and then, did Mike quietly ask if we should move again? And even now, sometimes late at night, I swear I still hear that knock."
Hi, I'm Melissa, and I'm going to tell you about 2 horrifying incidents that happened to me when I was home alone one night. One is from my childhood, and the other happened not 6 months ago. If you spend too much time at home alone, you might learn from my experiences, so keep watching. You know how as kids our parents always tell us not to talk to strangers or take anything from them, right? Well, I am a living testimonial that you should never trust strangers, especially if you are a kid. Back when I was around 12 or 13, I used to live in a remote town with my parents. We had a big house there with lots of rooms, but other than me and my parents, no one lived in it. Plus, it was in the middle of nowhere. Even the nearest grocery store was 1.5 miles away. This meant I had no one to play with me. None of my friends could visit me unless their parents drove them to my house and vice versa. It used to get pretty lonely at times, so just like any preteen, I decided to find friends online. I knew it was not advisable to talk to strangers online or offline, but I was desperate and bored. Facebook and other social media platforms were pretty famous and new back then, so I had a bunch of friends online whom I had never met before. Most of them lived outside the country and were of all ages. I wasn't picky. All I wanted was someone to talk to. One day, my parents decided to visit my grandma, who lived in the neighboring town. Around 8 in the evening, my mom called me and said that she and Dad were going to spend the night at Grandma's. Although I loved being home alone, I do not enjoy spending the night alone. The dark forest around my home scares me. But that night, I had no choice. I locked all the doors and windows, ate my dinner, and did the only thing that would distract me, chat online. I was talking to someone named Haley. She lived in London and was my age as well. She and I spoke regularly along with Misha and Alex. However, amongst 72 of my Facebook friends, I had only ever spoken or chatted to 50. That's when I got a message from a friend I had never spoken to.
How was your microwaved pizza?
At first, I did not read the message, but I was forced to open it when the second message popped up.
Having fun talking with Haley?
I was so shocked that I opened the message and just stared at it for a while. How this person who claimed to live in Vietnam knew about my whereabouts was a mystery to me. How do you know this? 3 dots appeared on my screen and then disappeared. Then again reappeared and then disappeared once more. Then this person whose name was Jim typed something that blew my mind.
You just gotten downstairs to grab a bottle of water. After that, you changed into your nightdress. And now after having dinner, you're talking to your Facebook friends. Am I right?
This shook me to my core. The only way this person, who is at least a couple of continents apart, could see me was if he was here. Before this day, I had never spoken to Jim. Upon checking his account, all I found were photos of anime and nothing else. How do you know what I'm doing? I was so naive that I bluntly asked him that. The dots appeared and then disappeared again. I just sat there, staring at my screen for at least 20 minutes, waiting for this guy to answer, when another text popped up.
You've been waiting for my reply, sitting in front of the screen for 20 minutes straight. It's past your bedtime. Shouldn't you go to sleep now?
I jumped out of my chair as if it were on fire and started roaming around the house, checking through the windows if any person was lurking around our property. I saw only darkness and the silhouette of trees. I was so scared that I walked up to my PC in the hopes of just shutting it down. The last message, however, sealed the deal.
Stop looking for me. You'll never find me. Go to bed, kid. Your parents will be worried about you.
I switched off the PC and went to bed. The next morning, I was so scared that I showed the text to my parents. And as my father worked in tech, he knew a thing or two about computers. He did something and found out that the webcam was hacked by a dude in Vietnam, and he was spying on me with that. That night was the most terrifying night of my life. My parents had always advised me to unplug the webcam, but I never listened. I guess I learned my lesson the hard way. But since that day till now, I used thick electric tape to cover my webcam or front camera whenever I'm not using it. I was thankful that the guy did not misuse it in any way that would harm me. The second story is far more recent. Now, a year ago, me and my boyfriend moved into a new apartment complex. The apartment we are renting is big and cozy, perfect for my home office. My boyfriend works the afternoon shift. This means he goes to work around 1 p.m. and returns around 10 or 11 at night. Most of the time, I am either asleep or working by then, so he uses his set of keys to open the apartment. Other than him and me, no one has the keys to our apartment. One evening, around 9, as I was cooking our dinner, I heard the front door wiggle. A huge smile spread on my face as I thought my boyfriend, Zaid, had returned, but when I looked at the clock, it was only 9. He was having to deal with a new project that week, so he was coming home late, which meant whoever it was wasn't Zaid. Plus, if it were him, he would have been inside the home by now. The door now kept wiggling, and for a couple of minutes, I just stared at it. Someone was trying to get into our apartment. Someone was breaking into it. I panicked and hid behind a table and kept peeking out at the door while calling 911. The operator told me to stay put and grab something for self-defense. I picked up a glass vase placed on the table and kept looking at the doorknob, which was still wiggling. I was so scared that I was practically sweating with terror. My food was burning on the stove, but I did not care. All I wanted was for the cops to get here. A minute later, a sharp metal blade-like thing was shoved between the door and the frame of the door, and now the robber was trying to cut the metal lock. After witnessing that, I got up, ran into the bathroom attached to our master bedroom, locked the door, and hid in the tub, sobbing. I was always a little terrified of staying home after the webcam incident. So I decided to call Zaid and told him everything while tears ran down my eyes. A few minutes later, I heard knocks on my front door. The cops were here and asking me to open the door. With Zaid on the line and a vase in one of my hands, I opened the door. 3 cops were standing in the hallway, and 2 of them were handcuffing a shady-looking old man. The cop who had knocked on my door told me not to worry. The person who was trying to break into my home was the previous tenant, who wanted to retrieve some stuff that he had left behind. I handed over some old furniture and clothes to the owner, which we had found in the apartment. They must have belonged to this old man. We knew that the previous tenant was evicted as he did not pay the rent on time, but we had no clue it was this old man. By the time the cops left with the man, Zaid got home. I cried when I saw him again, as relief flooded my body. The cops told Zaid that the man's name was Matthew, and that he was a drunk delusional who had no clue what he was doing most of the time. He did not try to break into our house intentionally to scare me, but to just get his stuff back. Nevertheless, he was arrested, and we applied for a restraining order. Have you ever experienced anything similar when you were home alone at night?
Hey, my name is Leonard. I currently hold a very important position in the information security sector at a place I can't mention, but I can tell you it's pretty big and important. Many have a very long journey to get to where I am, but others like me started studying programming when they were very young. Do you know what it was that got me so interested in learning so fast about computer security? Well, what I lived through that night that I thought I was home alone, but without knowing it, I was trapped in a hell from which the only way I got out alive was a miracle. It all started on a Tuesday night in my apartment. I had moved in a few days before, and the internet company had taken their time to install the service for me. I'd spent the whole day surfing the internet since I was on vacation for 2 more weeks, and both my girlfriend and friends were busy working full-time. Anyway, I wanted to get some content to start a YouTube channel of mysteries, so I was going to some pretty weird sites. I found all the sites on Reddit since I was never a big fan of the dark web. I'm not one of those people who was looking for trouble with the wrong people. Maybe that was my mistake, thinking that only bad people were on the deep web. As I was browsing through various sites, I came across one that caught my attention. It was a page where everyone spoke in different languages. And by different languages, I don't mean that they were speaking in English and Spanish. I could recognize that they spoke English, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, Russian, and many more languages that honestly I didn't know. The weirdest thing was that even though it was 2 a.m., they were all talking in a pop-up chat that opened up on the screen. I started taking pictures and then translating what they were saying. I understood the messages in English, of course, and some in Spanish, but none of them said anything relevant. They were planning to find someone, but without seeing the rest of the messages, I couldn't understand the context. After translating the messages, I understood what was going on. The person that they wanted to find was me. They were talking about an invader, and they were sharing with each other an IP number. After checking, I realized that IP number was mine. I panicked and left the page. I restarted the computer and the modem. Luckily, I had a modem with a variable IP. This meant that every time I restarted the modem, I had a new IP, which was perfect in case they tried to do something to me with my old IP number. As I rebooted the computer, I was a little scared, but at the same time, I was quite happy. With all the pictures I'd taken, I was sure I could make a great first video of this. Who knows? Maybe I could even start a horror story, and I could be the main character. On reflex, I logged into my social networks as soon as the computer turned back on, and that's when I realized something. I had more than 30 chat requests on WhatsApp web. all from unknown numbers, from different parts of the world that were talking to me in code that I didn't really understand. At that moment, I panicked. This was no longer something as innocent as finding a person's IP. I mean, that was weird, but I knew a lot of people who could easily do that. Now, how do you explain to me that all these people suddenly had my cell phone number? This was getting personal. I started nervously blocking as many numbers as I could, but as fast as I blocked one, another one would talk to me. After a few minutes of blocking numbers, I realized that I was getting numbers that I'd already blocked. None of this made any kind of sense to me, and you know what? It got much worse. As time went on, I just started to ignore the messages. I thought about getting a new number, but when I logged in out of curiosity and saw the new messages, I realized that that wasn't going to work either. I looked at the files that they were sending to me in terror. I knew I didn't have to open any of the files, but the preview was enough to know what I was going to find. They were pictures. Pictures of my house. I ran to the window and saw only people walking by. Were they the ones who had taken the pictures of me? Maybe they were. Maybe they weren't. They could be anyone. I panicked and told all my friends to come and spend the night with me when they got off of work. My girlfriend wanted to come too, but I didn't want to expose her to whatever was going on here. After a few more hours, I began to calm down, knowing that my friends were already leaving work, and little by little, some of them would be coming to my house. I sat patiently, listening for any noise, checking the messages these strange people were sending me. The pictures had stopped coming about 30 minutes ago. I wondered if they'd calmed down, or did they know I was waiting for them? My thoughts were interrupted by a noise at the front door. Someone was knocking. I quickly checked my WhatsApp, and none of my friends had said that they were here. I didn't know who was knocking at the door, but it wasn't my friends. I approached the door with a huge knife I had taken from the kitchen. Hello? Who is it? There was no answer, and after a few seconds, there was another knock on the door. Leave, now! There are people coming, and I'll call the police. You don't want to be here when they arrive. Stop harassing me, or you'll be arrested. I grabbed my cell phone and quickly called the police. The phone rang for only a few seconds, and they answered, but the person who answered wasn't a police officer.
Meet the eye. Follow the eye. Find your past and your future. The eye is watching.
I cut the phone in terror and ran to the kitchen door. I had to get out of there, even if it was just through the back door. I ran as fast as I could, but just as I was about to open the door, someone opened it for me. I recoiled in terror as 4 men in black robes and white masks came through the door. All the masks were different, but terrifying in equal measure. Who are you? What are you doing here? What do you want? Suddenly, I stopped hearing banging on the front door. Someone put a key in and just opened it. I panicked at the thought of these people, that they could come in whenever they wanted. They were just knocking on the door to scare me. After the front door opened, 5 other people came in and locked me in. I was totally cornered by almost 10 people in black robes with masks on their faces. They were all over 6 foot tall, probably had platforms or something like that to make them taller. If so, I could surely escape by grabbing one of them. But did I really want to take the risk? All the walls started to close in around me. These people kept closing in on me, taking small steps that cornered me. I could only stand against the wall, pointing out my knife, uselessly. At some point, I was going to have to defend myself. But I didn't know how. I was afraid that everything would be much worse if I did. When the people finished locking me in, I could see how they took something out of their pockets. The worst was about to begin. I tried to resist as much as I could, but there were so many of them, and I was so scared that I couldn't move. All these people took syringes out of their pockets and stuck them all over my body. All these syringes had liquid in them that I didn't know what it was. I resisted as much as I could. I was able to throw some of the syringes away, but they were too much. My body felt weak from one moment to the next, as if I was falling asleep. I saw more people with syringes entering the room, sticking them into me without any resistance. After that, nothing was the same. I woke up the next day and the first thing I did was vomit. My body felt terrible. I had horrible feelings that I'd never had before in my life. I checked my cell phone and in confusion I realized that none of my friends had messaged me. But the strange thing was that I hadn't messaged them either. I checked the WhatsApp web on my computer and realized that the page said WhatsApp web without the second P in WhatsApp. That chat was fake. I never really warned my friends to come. I went to the hospital immediately and they found nothing out of the ordinary. But since then, my body feels terrible. Sometimes I see people spying on me and walking near my house, smiling at me. Since that day, I never feel alone. I have the feeling that they're always there, spying on me. I started to study computer security, thinking that I'd be able to find these people and know if they were still watching me, but it doesn't make sense. My body is getting weaker, and I'm starting to get weirder and weirder illnesses that make me weaker and weirder. I spent the last few days alone, separated from my girlfriend, fighting with my friends, waiting for whatever happens to me to happen. I don't think I'll ever learn anything from these people. I don't think I have much time to do it either. Maybe, just maybe, this is just another way to spend my time before the bitter end. I used to think being alone meant freedom. No parents telling you what to do. No rules about staying up late or eating junk food in front of the TV. That night, I learned that being home alone meant something entirely different. It meant being vulnerable in ways I'd never imagined, trapped in a place that was supposed to keep me safe, but instead became a cage I couldn't escape from. It was October, and the Wisconsin cold had already started creeping in through the windows. My parents had gone to bed early, exhausted from work, and I was in my room doing homework when I heard the first sound. It wasn't loud, just a soft thud against the front door, like someone had bumped into it accidentally. I paused, listening. When nothing else happened, I went back to my assignment. Then I heard it again, louder this time, followed by the sound of wood splintering and my mom's voice calling out in confusion and fear. I froze. My pencil slipped from my hand and clattered onto the desk, but I barely noticed because my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to move, to run to my parents' room or lock my door or do something, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I just sat there, paralyzed, listening to the sounds downstairs, the heavy footsteps, the muffled voices, and then the silence that followed, a silence so complete it felt like the house itself had stopped breathing. When my door opened, I saw him for the first time. He was tall, wearing dark clothes and a mask that covered most of his face, and he didn't say anything at first. He just stood there staring at me with eyes that were cold and empty. I remember thinking, this isn't real. This can't be happening. But then he stepped forward and grabbed my arm. His grip was so tight it hurt, and I knew with absolute certainty that it was real. He told me not to scream, not to fight, that if I did what he said, everything would be okay. But I knew he was lying because I'd already heard the shots downstairs. The sounds that meant my parents weren't coming to save me. He dragged me out of my room, down the stairs, past the living room where I tried not to look at what I knew was there. The front door was hanging off its hinges, and the cold air hit my face as he pulled me outside and shoved me into the trunk of his car. The last thing I saw before he slammed it shut was my house, the lights still on in the windows. The place where I'd lived my entire life now looking like a crime scene from a movie. Then everything went dark, and all I could hear was the engine starting and the sound of gravel crunching under the tires as he drove away. I don't know how long I was in that trunk. It felt like hours, my body cramped and aching, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. I thought about my parents, about whether they were still alive, about whether anyone would notice I was gone. I thought about all the things I'd never get to do. Never graduate high school, never go to college, never grow up and have a life of my own. And I thought about him, the man driving the car, wondering what he wanted from me and how far he was willing to go. When the car finally stopped, he opened the trunk and pulled me out. We were in the woods, surrounded by trees so thick I couldn't see the road anymore. There was a cabin, small and run down with boarded-up windows and a door that creaked when he pushed it open. He shoved me inside and told me this was my new home, that I'd better get used to it because I wasn't leaving anytime soon. The cabin smelled like mold and old wood, and there was nothing inside except a bare mattress on the floor and a bucket in the corner. He locked the door behind him when he left, and I heard his footsteps fading away, leaving me alone in the dark. The days blurred together after that. He came and went, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just checking to make sure I was still there. He told me his name was Jake, that he'd been watching me for months, that he'd chosen me specifically because I was perfect. I didn't understand what that meant, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to go home, to see my parents again, to wake up and realize this was all a nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real, and every day that passed made it harder to believe that I'd ever escape. I tried to keep track of time by counting the days, scratching marks into the wall with my fingernail, but eventually I lost count. Weeks turned into months, and I started to forget what my old life was like. I forgot the sound of my mom's voice, the way my dad used to laugh at stupid jokes, the feeling of being safe and normal and free. All I knew was the cabin, the cold, the fear that never went away no matter how hard I tried to push it down. But I didn't give up. I couldn't. There was something inside me, some small stubborn part that refused to accept that this was how my story would end. So I watched him, studied his routines, waited for the moment that he'd make a mistake. And one day, 88 days after he'd taken me, that moment came. He'd gotten careless, left the door unlocked while he was distracted, and I didn't hesitate. I ran. I ran through the woods, barefoot and freezing, branches tearing at my clothes and my skin. But I didn't stop. I ran until I saw a house, a woman walking her dog, and I stumbled toward her, gasping and crying, begging her to help me. She called the police, and when they arrived, they found the cabin, found him, found everything. I was safe. I was free. But even now, months later, I still feel like I'm back in that trunk, back in that cabin, back in the dark, waiting for him to come through the door. Because some things you don't escape from. Not really. They stay with you forever. A shadow that never quite goes away.
I was 17, and that night was supposed to be quiet and simple. My mom left for her night shift at the hospital just after 9, wearing the same tired expression she always had before work. She reminded me to lock the door, text her if I needed anything, and try to sleep at a decent hour. I nodded and watched her car disappear down the street. My brother wasn't home either. He had gone to spend the weekend with his girlfriend, which meant I had the entire place to myself. I had been looking forward to that. I liked the idea of being alone without anyone watching what I did. I locked the front door and checked the windows, and I turned on the TV, grabbed snacks, and decided it would be a movie night. But I kept the kitchen light on because I didn't like seeing it completely dark when I walked past it. Eventually, I went to my bedroom with my laptop and phone. I closed the door and locked it without thinking too much about it. I sat on my bed chatting with friends, laughing quietly so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Around midnight, my friends started logging off one by one. I stayed awake, scrolling through videos and rewatching scenes from a movie I barely paid attention to. My phone battery was low, and I told myself I would sleep soon, but I didn't rush it. Before anything happened, there was a moment where my focus drifted away from the screen. I didn't hear a sound, but my body went still anyway. I stared at my bedroom door without knowing why, watching the thin line of light from the kitchen under it. That light changed. Slowly, something blocked it. A shadow passed from one side of the door to the other, steady and deliberate. I sat up straight, my heart speeding up instantly. My phone slipped from my hand and landed on the bed. The shadow stopped. Whoever it was stood directly outside my door. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, listening for footsteps or movement, but there was nothing. Then my mom's voice came from the hallway right behind the door. She told me to open up and say hello. Her voice sounded calm, relaxed, like she had just come home from the grocery store instead of work. My body reacted before my mind did. My hands started shaking so badly I had to press them into the mattress to steady them. My mom was not supposed to be home, and she never came back once her shift started. She always texted first. Always. "Open the door, darling. Are you okay? You're not answering me." The tone didn't change. She just repeated the same request, like she was waiting patiently for me to obey. I grabbed my phone and unlocked it, my thumb hovering over the emergency call screen. My chest felt tight, and I had to force myself to breathe slowly. I stayed silent, hoping she would move away, hoping I would hear footsteps heading down the hallway. Instead, she knocked. Once, then again. Each knock was spaced out and controlled, not angry and not worried. That scared me more than yelling would have. My mom never knocked like that. Before the next thing happened, there was silence. Total silence. No knocking, no breathing, no movement. I waited, counting seconds in my head, hoping to hear her walk away. I leaned forward and whispered her name, barely making a sound. There was no response. I whispered it again, louder this time, my voice shaking. Her voice came back suddenly, louder and sharper. She asked what was wrong with me and why I was acting weird. The calm tone was gone, replaced by irritation that felt forced and unnatural. Then she started screaming. She shouted my name over and over, slamming her hand against the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The sound made me flinch and curl in on myself, covering my ears as tears filled my eyes. Just as suddenly, it stopped. The screaming cut off, leaving the house completely silent again. I sat there shaking, my thoughts racing and crashing into each other. Every instinct told me not to open the door, but another part of me needed to see what was there. I needed proof that this was real. Before I could change my mind, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The hallway was completely dark. The kitchen light was gone, and the darkness felt heavy and wrong, filling the space in a way that didn't make sense. My eyes couldn't adjust, and it felt like the darkness was pressing toward me. Before I could step back, the darkness moved faster. It flooded the hallway and poured into my room, swallowing the light behind me. My room disappeared, and I was surrounded by nothing. I tried to move, but my legs barely responded. My breathing became loud and uneven, and panic took over completely. I forced myself forward, one step at a time, my hands shaking in front of me. Something screamed directly into my face. The sound was violent and overwhelming, and pain exploded across my skin. I felt claws tear into my arms, my neck, my face. I screamed and swung wildly, hitting nothing. I ran blindly, crashing into furniture and walls, tripping and falling until I slammed into my bedroom door. I forced it shut and locked it, flipping the light on with shaking hands. The room was normal again, but I wasn't. Blood ran down my arms and deep scratches burned across my skin. My shirt was torn and my hands shook so badly I could barely hold my phone. Before calling anyone, I listened. The hallway light was back on. Everything looked normal through the crack under the door, like nothing had happened at all. I called my mom, crying so hard I could barely speak. She answered from work, confused and scared, telling me she had never left the hospital and never spoken to me. She came home as fast as she could, and when she arrived, she found me sitting on my bed shaking and bleeding. She hugged me tightly and didn't let go. We checked the house together. Every door was locked, every window was closed, there was no sign of anyone else being there. The scratches healed, but the fear didn't. My mom stopped taking night shifts after that. She believed something happened, even if she didn't understand it. I don't stay alone anymore. Lights stay on all night, and my bedroom door stays open.
A few months ago, I moved into a new house with great enthusiasm. The house was perfect, but I didn't know what was hidden behind it. The events took place the week after I moved. One morning, I had filled the mug halfway before I left for work, and when I came back, the level of coffee was lower, and the mug had been moved to the other side of the counter. I stood in the kitchen looking at it while trying to remember if I had done that myself. Most evenings I followed the same routine after work because it helped the new place feel like home. That was why the coffee mug bothered me more than it should have. 2 days later, another small detail forced me to think about the problem again. When I returned from work that evening, the bathroom light was turned on, even though I clearly remembered switching it off before leaving that morning. I stood in the hallway staring at the open bathroom door while trying to replay my routine step by step in my mind. I walked into the bathroom and looked around carefully, expecting to find something that explained why the light had been left on. The sink was dry, the mirror was clean, and nothing appeared to be missing from the cabinet or the shelves. The room looked exactly the way I had left it. After turning the light off, I checked the rest of the apartment slowly. The kitchen looked normal. The living room looked normal, and the door lock showed no signs of damage. Even though everything looked fine, the apartment no longer felt completely empty. 3 nights later, something happened that I could not ignore anymore. I had fallen asleep after midnight, and the apartment had been completely quiet when I turned off the lights and went to the bedroom. At some point during the night, a dull sound woke me up, and I opened my eyes while trying to understand where it had come from. Instead of getting out of bed immediately, I stayed still and listened carefully because the noise had clearly come from somewhere inside the apartment. A few seconds later, I heard another small sound that seemed to come from the kitchen counter. It was not loud enough to sound like something falling, but it was strong enough that I knew it had not come from outside the building. Before leaving the bedroom, I took a moment to listen again because the idea that someone might be inside the apartment had already crossed my mind. The silence that followed made the situation even more uncomfortable. I stepped into the hallway slowly and walked toward the kitchen while watching the doorway carefully. The room was dimly lit by streetlights outside, and at first nothing looked unusual, until I noticed that one of the cabinets had been left open. I clearly remembered closing it earlier that night because I had washed dishes before going to bed. Seeing the cabinet door hanging open made my chest tighten as I walked closer to the counter. The next thing I noticed was the kitchen window above the sink, which was partially open and letting cold air move through the room. The latch was completely unlocked, and the paper towels on the counter were shifting slightly in the breeze. I closed the window and locked it, while trying to convince myself that I must have forgotten to secure it earlier. After that, I searched every room in the apartment, but I did not find anyone hiding inside. During the next few days, I began paying attention to every small detail inside the apartment. Each morning before leaving for work, I checked the windows, the locks, and the position of certain objects in the kitchen and living room. One evening I returned home and noticed my laptop sitting slightly open on the table, even though I always closed it completely before leaving. When I lifted the lid, the screen turned on, and the browser was open on a page that I did not remember visiting earlier that day. Before touching anything else, I stood there staring at the screen while the same thought returned to my mind. Someone had been inside the apartment again, and this time, that person had been close enough to use my computer. That night I checked the door lock several times before going to bed because the situation had stopped feeling like a coincidence. The apartment was silent when I turned off the lights, but the memory of the open laptop stayed in my mind while I tried to sleep. Sometime after 2 a.m, another noise woke me up, and this time the sound came from near the front door. Instead of rushing into the hallway, I stayed still and listened carefully while my mind tried to understand what I had heard. The noise sounded like metal touching metal, similar to the soft click a key makes when someone slowly turns it inside a lock. The next morning, I decided that I needed proof of what was happening inside the apartment. Instead of going to work immediately, I called my supervisor and explained that I would arrive late because of a personal issue. After making that call, I left the apartment like usual, locked the door behind me, and walked toward the subway station. When I reached the corner of the street, I stopped and waited for several minutes while watching the building from a distance. Eventually, I turned around and walked back to the entrance. The hallway was quiet when I reached my floor, but when I stood in front of my door, I paused and listened carefully before unlocking it. At first, there was silence inside, which made me question whether my suspicion had been wrong. Just as I began to feel foolish for coming back, I heard a chair scrape slowly across the kitchen floor. That sound removed every doubt I had. Someone was clearly inside my apartment while I was supposed to be at work. I unlocked the door carefully and pushed it open. Instead of chaos or signs of a break-in, I found a woman standing at the kitchen counter pouring hot water into a mug. She turned around immediately when she heard the door open, and the shock on her face made it clear that she had not expected me to return. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The woman held the mug in her hands while looking at me with an expression that mixed embarrassment and fear. I stepped into the kitchen and asked who she was, trying to keep my voice steady. She explained that she used to live in the apartment before moving out several months earlier. When I demanded to know how she had entered, she admitted that she still had copies of the keys that she had never returned to the landlord. She said that sometimes she came back during the day because she missed the place and liked sitting near the window where she used to drink coffee. Hearing that explanation made my anger rise quickly because the strange events of the past week suddenly made sense. The moved objects, the open laptop, and the unlocked window had all been caused by someone casually entering my apartment while I was gone. I told her very clearly that she had been entering my home without permission and that the situation was unacceptable. The woman looked ashamed when she heard that, and she quickly grabbed her bag from the chair near the window. Before leaving, she apologized and insisted that she never meant to scare me. Even though she seemed sincere, the fact remained that she had been inside my apartment many times without my knowledge. She walked out into the hallway, and I locked the door immediately after she left. Later that same afternoon, I bought a completely new lock for the apartment door. I did not wait for the landlord to solve the problem because the situation had already shown that the existing lock could not be trusted. The woman never returned after that day, and I never saw her again in the neighborhood. The experience left me with a very clear lesson that I now tell anyone who moves into a new place. If you ever rent an apartment that someone else lived in before you, the first thing you should do is change the locks immediately.